Instead of you rereading notes from your book mindlessly again and again and again, yes, passive work, you want to do something that's more active. You want to try and remember what was written in the book and try to retrieve it from your own brain. Other ways you could do this is by covering up a flashcard and trying to say out loud what was written on the flashcard, or trying to write down again what was written on the flashcard on another piece of paper. Every time you do this, your brain strengthens the retrieval pathways, making you remember faster and for longer. Number 2. Spaced repetition. Rather than trying to cram the night before, trying to remember everything that you wrote in your notes, try spacing your learning out in increasing intervals. So for example, 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, etc. What this does is it takes advantage of the forgetting curve. Each time you revisit the material, the memory decays more slowly, allowing you to put it from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. Number 3, blurting. Blurting is when you read a textbook or you read a page or a small section of your textbook and you hide it and you put it onto the ground or whatever, and you try to write what you can remember from that section, that paragraph, that page of a textbook from your memory. Is where you blurt, and you just, it doesn't have to be neat, you can just write it in note form. Every single thing you can remember about that page, you write it, and then you compare after you finished what you wrote on the page and what's written in the book, so you can see exactly what you remember and what you don't remember. And then you keep on doing that 2 or 3 times for the same page, and then slowly you should be able to see you remember more and more from that page. And then after a couple of tries, you should be able to remember 90% of what's on that page. Number 4, the Feynman technique. The Feynman technique is when you explain a concept or a topic within the subject. For example, biology, you could be explaining photosynthesis, and you explain it as if you're explaining it to a 5-year-old. So instead of using very complicated vocabulary and terminology from your subject, you could explain it very simply as if you're speaking to a 5-year-old. And ideally, you should have somebody that's there to question you, like somebody who's not very well versed in that topic. So what they could do is they could question you and they could force you to fill in the gaps in the knowledge that you don't know. So if they question you and you don't know the answer to it, that's a gap in the knowledge that you need to try and find out. So afterwards you can research that gap in knowledge, and therefore that's what learning is. So you'll be learning over time, and you make sure that you understand the topic wholly and completely in like a holistic manner. So the main thing is the Feynman technique is for you to teach someone else, and as a result you'd be learning the topic yourself. The best way to learn is to teach. I think that's what Richard Feynman said. Number 5, interleaving. Interleaving is when you vary the topics that you do within your subject practice. So for example, if I was doing mathematics, instead of just doing 20 algebra questions in a row, I would do, for example, 5 on algebra, 5 on coordinate geometry, 5 on calculus, 5 on binomial expansion, and I wouldn't just do them 5, 5, 5, 5 in neat categories. I would mix them all up and do it in a random, varied sort of way, because I'm trying to mimic how it will come up in the exam. The exam, they won't just give it to you in neat categories. Okay, here's the algebra section, here's the calculus section. They'll mix and match and do so many crazy things to try and get you to lose marks. So you should try to emulate that within your practice sessions as well. Number 6, dual coding. Dual coding means you're combining the visuals and the words together. So for example, charts and explanations, diagrams and descriptions, pictures and writing. So it engages multiple parts of the brain simultaneously, allowing you to remember the information better. Number 7, chunking. Chunking can be technically split into 2 separate groups, but essentially chunking is grouping smaller bits of information together so it forms one package, such that when you access that package within your memory, you're able to see the individual smaller units of information. So for example, trying to memorize the digits of pi. So do you know pi 3.14159265535, all of that stuff? You can try to memorize them in groups of 3, and that would be an example of chunking. So 3.141592653, something like that. So that's one form of chunking. Another form of chunking is when you do that with the information inside of your textbook. And let's say you are doing, like, again, biology photosynthesis, and you come across a page that talks about one topic. What you would do is read it and try to understand it as much as possible, and you would try to chunk that whole entire like subtopic into one sort of word or one sentence. So it's sort of like summarizing, but when you access that sentence or when you access that topic, you can remember all of the nitty-gritty details within that topic, and that just comes down to how well you can chunk or how well you can summarize. If you guys want a better like detailed guide on how you should be able to chunk better within your revision, leave a comment down below or like this video so then I know you want to see that. Number 8, the Mind Palace. The Mind Palace, if you haven't watched Sherlock Holmes, is when you create a story or something like a memory, a really long memory within your brain to try and remember key facts and key information. And what happens is, if you create a really funny and really vivid story that you can remember the facts and information that coincides with the events that take place in your story, you'll be able to remember the key facts and information more easily. So try to make your story as funny as possible. Another way you can do this is, imagine you walking through your home. You've seen your home so many times that you could probably like walk through your home like eyes closed, just like that, just remembering off the top of your head. So now imagine I'm walking through my home. Okay, I place 1914 or key date or key figure on my sofa. So then now in my brain, whenever I walk to my sofa, I remember that key date that I placed on that, 1914. And if I go to a kitchen, what you could do, you could separate out different rooms by subjects. So for example, the living room could be to do everything with history. Your kitchen could be to do everything with biology. Upstairs could be everything to do with chemistry, whatever. So the mind map is a really powerful tool that you can use to remember key facts and information that you just cannot put into your brain like using flashcards or using another technique. Number 9, arguably the most famous studying hack of all time, the Pomodoro technique. Although this probably needs no introduction at all, I'll explain it to you anyway. The Pomodoro technique is when you work in intervals of studying and then having a break, studying, having a break, so on and so forth. So what you could do is, normally it's 25 minutes of studying, then a 5-minute break, then you repeat that 3 or 4 times, then after you have a long session, then you take a longer 15 and 20-minute break. And then you do that whole entire thing again and again for as long as you need to. I'm going to be honest, personally, I don't use the Pomodoro technique over there, because I find that once I get to the 25-minute mark, that's when I really start to get going. But then of course with the Pomodoro technique, you normally take a break at a 25-minute mark. So what I would suggest, play around with the timings. See, maybe an hour of studying and then a 15-minute break, or 2 hours of studying and a half an hour break. See what works best for you, and if you feel like the Pomodoro technique isn't your thing, then you don't have to use it. You don't have to use any of the studying techniques within this video actually. These are just all there to help you. Mix and match, see which one you need, and from there you should be able to help you with studying. But anyway, yeah, so what I would just normally do is I would just work as long as possible, then take a break like half an hour, maybe an hour, and then work as long as possible. That's my version of the Pomodoro technique, because especially when I take a break, if I take like a 5 or 10 minute break, that like ends up into like a 1 hour, 2 hour break, because I end up going on YouTube Shorts or like WhatsApp, Instagram, and then after that I just spend too much time there. So yeah, Pomodoro technique is good for some people, but for me personally, nah. Number 10, flow sessions. A flow session is what I was describing to you before in Pomodoro technique. It's when you work for so long, it's when you're in the zone and you just work for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and you don't feel tired. Once you're really into the like work that you're doing, and once you really get into the zone is not something that you can hit like very often, but once you do, it's almost as if you're able to work non-stop for like forever and you won't even feel that tired. So yeah, try to get into the flow session as quickly as possible and as routinely as possible to allow you to maximize the amount of hours that you study. A good way to do this is by having a routine that you would normally do before you get into the flow session. So having that routine that you do every single time allows you to like access and get into the flow session that much more easily. And when you do get into the flow session, when you do get into the zone, try to think about what sort of actions, what sort of things did I do to help me get into the zone, because it's always like a trigger event or activation like point that happens that allows you to get into the zone much more easily. So trying to think about what that thing is for you to help you get into the zone much more quickly, trying to think about that and act on it will help you study for much longer. It's going to be easier for you to study actually, not only just longer.